about recreational drugs, it's reasonably intuitive to believe that people are consuming plant products, like this marijuana, or these lines of cocaine. Whoops. But those origins are also shared by most pharmaceutical drugs, even though they were synthesized in a lab and packaged into pill formats that bear no resemblance to flora. For example, the most commonly used drug in the world today is aspirin, a little white pill that many of us have used to soothe our pains, whether it's for curing a headache or to help bring down a fever. However, despite its pharmaceutical creations, aspirin is also originally derived from plants. The scientific name for aspirin is acetyl acid, or ASA for short. And embedded in that name is the name of its vegetal source, Salix, which is the scientific genus name for willow trees.
Willow bark has been used for over 3,000 years as an analgesic medicine. Early Egyptians and Sumerians recorded their therapeutic use of the bark in ancient documents like the surgical papyrus. Here in North America, the indigenous peoples also knew about it and used willow bark infusions as pain relief to cure their ailments as well. However, many millennia later, modern chemists would isolate the active ingredient in the willow bark, a compound known as salicin, which would become the basis for the pharmaceutical pills known as ASA or aspirin. So you see, the plant kingdom is full of chemical compounds that are known to have biological effects on us and can be used as drugs, either recreationally or for medicinal purposes. But why would plants have all these molecules in them that have such profound effects on animals, including ourselves? The answer lies in the role that these chemicals played in defending plants against their principal natural enemies throughout evolution: insects. Prior to 450 million years ago, the only forms of life on land were microbes like bacteria, until at some point in the Silurian period, the first aquatic plants began to colonize the dry land on the edges of their aquatic oceanic habitats and would enjoy the abundant light and oxygen in their new terrestrial environments, which would have been completely devoid of animal herbivores at the time. All that would change once insects followed the plants onto land and quickly began feeding on the tender and vulnerable vegetation that they found there. Evidence of insects eating plants dates back to as early as 400 million years ago during the Devonian period. From that point onward, terrestrial success would favor plants that produced defensive chemicals that could protect them from being fed upon by insects. These plant defense chemicals would be particularly useful if they could have biological effects on their insect enemies, either by hindering their internal biochemical processes involved in digestion or acting as disruptions of their nervous systems. Thus began a 400 million year chemical arms race between plants and animals. It would lead the former to biochemically synthesize an array of defensive compounds that targeted pre-existing hormonal or neurological aspects of their animal enemies' bodies. Interestingly, many of the metabolic and physiological processes found in animals today evolved in ancestors that are common to most creatures, prior to them branching off from one another later in evolutionary time. This means that chemicals like opiates, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, and many more are commonly found in the hormonal and neurological machinery of widely unrelated animals, from worms and insects to fish and mammals. That, in turn, means that if a plant were to evolve chemicals that mimic the biological effects of serotonin, for example, it would on one hand have hormonal impacts on digestive processes in the guts of lower animals like insects, but on the other hand, it could act differently in higher animals like mammals, for which serotonin plays an important role as a mood-regulating neurotransmitter in their brains. Consequently, of the 400,000 known species of plants in existence today, most have evolved some form of defensive chemistry through their long history of insect antagonism. Some of these chemical defenses can have dramatic impacts on the nervous systems of highly intelligent animals like us humans. As we saw in previous episodes in this series, many people have been driven to abusing plant chemical drugs because of specific deficiencies in the emotional centers of their brains. Consequently, they suffer not only from the lingering and haunting effects of their personal lifetime traumas, but also from the debilitating and crippling effects of the drugs that they take to soothe that pain. From an empathetic and healing point of view, it is encouraging to know that the human brain is quite plastic, meaning that it has the ability to change itself. This notion gives hope to the prospects for achieving wellness in the minds of traumatized addicts, who have until very recently received only disdain and threats of incarceration as society's solution to their problems. There's a saying that neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that the brain can make new informational pathways moving forward, and likewise, it can do away with old trains of thought by breaking down and rewiring ingrained and harmful habits or ways of thinking. Much of the success of this process relies on reconfiguring the personal narratives and sense of self that we have that have been laid down during a lifetime of experiences and events that we use to define ourselves. As it turns out, our perspective on how we see ourselves, the rest of the world, and our place in it is largely derived from a particular series of connected nodes across the cortex in the human brain that is known as the default mode network, or DMN. This network of interconnected brain regions is mostly responsible for inward-facing thoughts about ourselves and our place in the world, ruminating upon emotional aspects of personal histories, social relationships, and our interactions with these. Our sense of self, which is mediated by the default mode network, is laid down over time, but especially during our childhood and early lifetime development. Once it is established in our brains, our daily waking life is largely a reaction to the socially conditioned perceptions, thoughts, and feelings that the DMN has encoded into our own personal realities. During regular waking states, when we're focusing on external tasks like playing hockey or attempting to solve mathematical formulas, for example, the default mode network is largely inactive and allows the brain to coordinate itself for the goal of solving the physical or mental challenges it is facing at the time. However, once these focused tasks are over, the DMN kicks into action and begins introspective reflections, leading to daydreaming and the presence of more free and creative thoughts. This internal personal compass that gives us our sense of self, or our ego as Freud called it, strikes a fine balance between the internal, emotional, and historical biographies we have of ourselves and our abilities to apply great mental energy and efforts to accomplishing important physical or cognitive acts out in the real world. If the DMN is underperforming, it may lead to perceptions of life that are too rigid and categorical and lacking in imagination and freedom of thought. This may cause individuals to feel stuck in a rut and trigger depression. However, when the DMN is overactive, it can cause psychotic effects, where too much of the mind at large leaks into regular daily processes and causes mental illnesses that are rife with confusion, hallucinations, and unstable perceptions of reality. So a fine balance must be struck between these two extremes for humans to experience so-called normal feelings and mental well-being. The ego that is built into and supported by our brain's default mode network is largely governed by the action of the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is why most pharmaceutical interventions on mood or emotional mental disorders will also involve the application of serotonin or serotonin-like chemicals. Traditionally, therapeutic attempts to rewire the brain away from harmful thoughts and habits towards good ones instead has been undertaken on the couches of psychologists or psychotherapists. These trained professionals can help to guide directed and informed discussions and reflections about their patients' traumas and life histories in such a way as to reframe the narrative and to create new, healthier, and happier ways of thinking and behaving in those people needing their help. In most cases, people experience great improvements in their mental well-being after many months to years of psychotherapy. But the long time commitments required to achieve this, not to mention the exorbitantly high costs associated with the treatments, are often a barrier too large for many people to overcome, and sadly prevents thousands of people from improving their mental health through this avenue. Recently, however, a new and exciting intervention has demonstrated tremendous potential in the psychotherapeutic treatments of mental disorders, that of taking psychedelic drugs under controlled clinical conditions. Psychedelics such as psilocybin found in magic mushrooms, LSD, or dimethyltryptamine in ayahuasca are strong mimics of serotonin, and as such, they have profound effects on our sense of self and perceptions of the world through their interaction with the workings of our default mode networks. By stimulating specific 5-HT type 2A serotonin receptors that are found in the connection networks of our brains, psychedelic drugs seem to have the effect of removing the constraints placed on our thoughts and perceptions by the DMN and allowing freer and much more vivid imaginations to emerge in the process. Although the exact experience under the different types of psychedelic drugs may differ slightly from one to another, there are many extraordinary features that are common to LSD, shrooms, ayahuasca, and others. These include vivid visual hallucinations, which involve undulating textures, vibrating with rhythmic frequencies, and warping or pulsating object boundaries in our field of view. There are often intricate tapestries, mandalas, or patterns of flowing geometric shapes and forms, accompanied by musical or verbal auditory hallucinations. One will often experience intense and direct access to emotions, and these may lead to spontaneous feelings of awe, wonder, bliss, joy, and excitement. When experienced in safe and supportive conditions, these psychedelic effects can promote individual feelings of trust, empathy, bonding, tenderness, and an acceptance of things in general. The perception of space and linear time also appears to be blurred. The feeling one gets is of inhabiting other dimensions of reality, where time doesn't exist, or may simply not appear to be relevant anymore. An important and lasting effect of the psychedelic experience is the breakdown of the sense of self, or the dissolution of the ego, as it is sometimes described. In this way, the psychedelic trip feels something like an out-of-body experience, and the psychonaut on this voyage ends up having a divine or mystical sense of being one with life, the universe, and everything in it.
As profound and strange as these psychedelic experiences can be for just about anyone who's ever tried one, we still don't fully understand how they work to help people climb out of their mental disorders that they may have had before taking psychedelics. One thing is for sure, however, the psychedelic experience can often be a life-changing one. Many people have had their perspectives shifted from bad to better after just a few short but very intense psychedelic hours, as opposed to the long and protracted process associated with traditional psychotherapy.
The key to the therapeutic benefits of psychedelic drugs seems to lie in their effect on our default mode network and their ability to provide us with more objective insights into our personal patterns of thoughts and behaviors, our perspectives on our personal problems, and on our past and future selves. fMRI image scans of people's brains while under the influence of psychedelic drugs like LSD or psilocybin show a brain that is lit up with connections across many brain regions that aren't normally communicating to one another during regular waking states. This may have the effect of changing the information dynamics in our brains in such a way that thinking processes can become less rigid and more diverse, particularly as it relates to our stories and feelings about ourselves and our personal issues. The default mode network may have played an important evolutionary role in our species by acting to limit or suppress wild fluctuations in perception and cognition, thus leading to a sense of reality that is stable and predictable. However, it becomes maladaptive in those of us whose DMN's version of a predictable world involves constant fear and despair. As a consequence, the DMN of a traumatized brain may in fact create a condition in which those people are trapped in their own mind's storyline of abuse, neglect, shame, and sadness, so that they can't shake the haunting feelings associated with their personal traumatic histories. Psychedelics may help to alleviate this burden by removing some of these constraints on our brains and allowing our perception, emotions, and cognition to be expanded so our personal narratives are able to be viewed in a different light. By disintegrating the DMN and its construct on the sense of self or ego, psychedelic drugs have the ability to affect psychoanalytical processes and help to dismantle long-held and built-in patterns of negative thoughts and self-destructive behaviors. By promoting a larger diversity of states of consciousness in more random and alternate forms than those found in normal waking life, psychedelics seem to allow us to reimagine ourselves free of past or future events and exist in a feeling state where optimism is actually possible.
The research into the psychotherapeutic benefits of psychedelics is still relatively young and ongoing. But one thing is clear, that psychedelic-assisted therapy can provide traumatized people with new and refreshing outlooks on their life stories, changing their perspectives on the seemingly immutable and inevitable nature of their own thoughts and habits. It can have long-lasting and profoundly transformative positive impacts on the well-being of people who are suffering from PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other neurological disorders like addictions. All of this is possible, and it's accompanied by the most magical and divine light show our known universe has ever seen.